On the richest space station in the galaxy, a powerful builder sat alone with his untouched meal when a starving mother, carrying her child, dared to step inside the most exclusive restaurant and begged for food. The entire room froze in silence. What happened next not only shocked the wealthy diners, but began a chain of events that would change lives forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video and tell us where you are watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The artificial rain tapped a soft rhythm on the clear shell that arched over the Oriole, the most exclusive restaurant on Helios Gate. Inside, air processors drifted rare scents from a dozen worlds. As if wealth itself had a fragrance, Marin Solace sat alone at his corner table, the one with the slowest view of the Nebula River. 4 hands rested around untouched glasses. The wine kissed the light, but his eyes kept returning to the chair across from him. It had been empty for 2 long years. The dining room hummed with polished laughter, the kind that never reached the eyes. A cluster of gilded traders pulsed with delicate biolights, showing off fortunes in colors. Nearby, a negotiator from Earth smiled carefully through a translation halo, their words gently bent into common speech. Hover trays flowed like quiet comets between tables. Yet Marin noticed little. He raised one glass toward the empty chair and whispered, not to be heard, a name that felt like a star once held and now gone cold. Then a voice, thin and unsteady, cut the room as cleanly as a wire through soft metal. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to disturb you. Could you spare some food for my child?" Conversations snapped off. The room performed a synchronized breath. Brig, the maitre d', with a diamond smile and iron rules, glided forward, already shaking his head. Marin lifted a hand, just one, and the tide of the room paused. Before him stood an Azurian mother, skin a faded sea blue that should have been bright. Her suit was patched and repatched. The small canister at her side rasped, mixing her safe gas into the room's oxygen. Held against her, a little one watched Marin's plate with a look no species could misunderstand. Hunger is a universal language. Marin felt something shift inside, a hinge unsticking. "Brig," he said softly, voice carrying like a bell. "2 meals for Azuran physiology, but just their air blend to comfort. Seat them here." Brig blinked. "Sir, the house policy was written when we built this ring," Marin said, and for the first time that evening, all 4 of his hands were in motion, a quiet signal of finality. "We can write it better. Now." The mother hesitated. "I cannot pay," she whispered. "Then it is fortunate I can," Marin replied, drawing the chair out with care. "I'm Marin." "Leora," she said, "this is Keo." Keo made a small sound, part whistle, part hum, and nestled closer, eyes still fixed on the food. The meals arrived, shaped precisely for Azuran needs, bright with mineral sheen. Leora fed Keo first, each small cube a miracle. Color returned to the child with every bite, a little more sea and a little less storm. When Leora finally ate, she saved half and wrapped it in a thin cloth. Marin tilted his head. "For later," she murmured. "There will be more," Marin said. "Tonight and tomorrow." Brig, now efficient in his surrender, arranged a table unit to blend more of Leora's native gas into the booth. Keo relaxed, the rasp at Leora's hip quieted. A few diners stared, discomfort painted on their faces like old laws. Marin's gaze swept the room once, and the stairs found other walls to admire. "Where are you living?" Marin asked, when Keo's breathing steadied. Leora's silence answered. The cargo wards needed no description. We can fix that, Marin said. Not with a lecture, Leora said gently. With keys, Marin replied, and work, if you want it. But first, you eat. For a time, they simply were. 3 beings at a small table in a large, watching restaurant, sharing food and a pocket of safer air. Leora's eyes filled with silver at unexpected moments. Kyo traced a finger along the glass to follow a slow shit beyond, smiling as if he owned the view. Marin listened to the rhythm of the rain overhead and found that for the first time in years, it did not sound like a farewell. When Leora rose to go, Briggs set a sealed parcel in her hands. More meals, medicines, a soft blanket that warmed by whispering. A friend of the house, he said, glancing at Marin. Please return tomorrow. Leora bowed her head, then looked at Marin in a way that was simpler than thanks and heavier than debt. We will, she said. Kyo lifted a hand. The smallest wave and the smallest smile. Marin watched them leave through the curve of the window. When they were gone, he stood too, but not to go home. He lingered in the service lanes, following at a distance only someone who designed half the station could manage. The path from the rich ring to the cargo wards was like walking down a dimming corridor. The lights thinned, the air thickened, and the sounds of work replaced the music of dining. Leora's door was a dented freight pod patched with hope. Inside, a nest of thermal fabric and a cracked heater made a brave promise against the cold. Marin's hands closed, not in anger at her, but at the space he had allowed to exist. He returned to his tower as the station slid into simulated night and stood with the stars for company. Loss had taught him to hold still. Hunger, it seemed, had taught him to move. By dawn, a crate sat outside the freight pod like a sunrise. Inside, calibrated nutrients, purifier tabs, a small inhaler, a toy, an old model vessel that lit softly when squeezed. There was a note, for 2 travelers between storms, from a neighbor. Across the station, Marin watched a tiny sparkle of silver fall onto the crate's lid and felt his world tilt, slightly, but forever. The next mornings followed each other like stepping stones. Each day, a crate appeared. Each day, Leora checked the shadows and then lifted Kyo into a better day. Marin timed the drops with a precision he usually reserved for safety systems. He told no one, save Joran, a watchful human who had worked with him for years and could keep a quiet better than vault doors could. Kyo learned the rhythm of the toy ship, squeezing it to send bands of gentle light around their narrow space. He hummed to the glow, and Leora, after checking the seals on the warmer, would hum along. Marin watched on a maintenance feed he probably wasn't supposed to access anymore, and felt something bloom in a place that had been winter for 2 years. On the 3rd week, the timing broke. Marin carried the crate himself, because Joran was inspecting an outlying strut, and because waiting felt like waiting too long. He stepped from the service corridor, set the box down, and turned to slip away. The hatch slid open with a soft cough. Leora stood there, hair loose around her face, suit patched but clean, eyes blue as a first clear morning. "It's you," she said. Her voice was not accusing. It was surprised, tired, kind. Marin almost lied. Old habits leaned toward shadows. Instead, he bowed. The quatridian gesture scaled smaller for narrow halls. "I wanted to be sure you had what you needed." Kyo peeked out from behind Leora's knees, the toy ship in one hand. "Are you the food angel?" he asked, in the careful way children save for big questions. Leora closed her eyes at the phrase, grief and gratitude sharing space. Marin knelt, joints protesting a little. "I'm just a neighbor who can carry heavy boxes," he said, "but I can do more than that, if you let me." Leora told him pieces, the way people do when they are not yet sure if telling is a door or a trap. She had trained as an engineer, happiest with airflow graphs and the quiet poetry of pressure. Then she had loved someone she should not have had to lose. Darren had been gentle, bright, and brave in small ways. His mother, Prefect Naxera, had been powerful, and bravery, when it was small, was easy to crush. Messages were blocked, jobs were closed, and a promising life narrowed to a corridor that led to the cargo wards. Keo arrived, a bright planet in a rough orbit. Leora endured. That was the word she used, and Marin felt it stick in his chest. "Come work with me," Marin said. "We build places where the air feels like safety. You are needed." Leora shook her head. "My papers were revoked after everything." "Papers can be printed," Marin said. "Skill cannot. You have it." "Prefect Naxera has long arms," Leora whispered. "Mine are longer," Marin answered, and for once it wasn't a metaphor. He arranged a room in a modest sector, 2 sleeping alcoves, a small kitchen, a window with the slow view of transports, arriving like patient birds. He paid for it as if it were ordinary, because ordinary is the dignity most gifts hope to have. He placed an entry request at his company that read like any other. Candidate shows clear mastery in atmospheric cycling. Request fast-track assessment. The system, built to serve function over noise, hummed along. Leora arrived for testing wearing her best, which still looked like repairs. The android assessor, Unit Q7, ran the trials without curiosity and ended them with quiet approval. In the first week, Leora increased a recycler's efficiency by 28% with a drawing she made on a food wrapper while Keo napped on her lap. Marin framed the wrapper by his desk without telling anyone why, then told everyone why. As weeks gathered, Marin found reasons to stop by engineering. He brought Keo a set of learning blocks that clicked by magnet and logic. He asked Leora to explain how her baffle curves reduced turbulence, and listened when she spoke. It felt like breathing without noticing the act. Joran teased him about it once, very lightly, and Marin stared at the stars until humor seemed like something that could live in the same room as memory. He never asked about Darren again. He didn't have to. The story hovered in pauses. And then a new pause opened. An encrypted transmission pinged the company relay, marked for Leora, but routed, politely, through executive clearance. The header said, "From a man who has been late for years." Marin read the first line, then closed the window and walked it to Leora's desk himself. She read in silence. The room changed around her without moving. "It's from him," she said, like naming a constellation she had known as a child. "He says he thought I left. He says he never received any message at all. He says his mother," her voice faltered. "He wants to come." Marin's breath stayed slow, because he had practiced slowness for a long time. "Do you want him to?" he asked. Leora's answer was not a word. She put a hand over Keo's hair and held it there, as if measuring how much of the past the present could carry. "I want Keo to meet his father," she said at last. "And I want the truth in a room with us." Marin nodded. He sent a reply from his office that was a location, a date, and a warning. "This family will not be harmed." Joran read the draft and added, "ever," then smiled without showing teeth. The night before the meeting, Marin didn't sleep. He walked the perimeter of his tower garden, listening to the leaves speak the language of air. It sounded like mercy trying to find its way into old structures. He hoped the walls would let it. Darren arrived pale with travel and heavy with regret. He looked nothing like a villain. He looked like someone who had been told a story every day until he believed it was the only one. Leora stood very still, shoulders set. Keo held Marin's smallest hand, the one he reserved for promises. Part 1. In a quiet conference room with a view of landing lights, they faced the past. Darren spoke first, voice rough. "I thought you left," he said, "because I was told you wanted better stars. I sent messages into silence and blamed myself for the empty." Leora blinked once, slowly. "I shouted into silence and blamed myself for the daring," she said. "We were both lied to." Keo stepped forward, like a small diplomat. "I built a ship," he said, lifting the toy Marin had given him. "It only flies when both of you hold it. Children understand rituals quicker than courts do." Darren knelt. Leora reached. The toy glowed, a soft, silly light, and something in the room stitched. The stitching did not erase the tear. Trust decided to take the long road. Darren found work on station, not under his mother's long reach, but within the honest gravity of freight schedules and stubborn containers. He visited Keo daily, learned the bend of bedtime stories and the weight of small questions. Leora let the door open a cautious width and waited to see if footsteps matched words. Marin, from the hall sometimes, listened to Keo's laugh rise like good pressure in a clean line. The peace held until the day it didn't. Prefect Naxira arrived like a practice storm, with lawyers in tailored skins and a voice calibrated to command. She walked into Marin's lobby, looked at the architecture as if it owed her rent, and said she had come to reclaim her son from poor choices and her family's name from scandal. The reception desk, which had seen 1,000 small emergencies and 3 big ones, dimmed its lights for drama. Marin stepped from the lift with the calm of someone who designed the hall he was standing in. He did not raise his voice. He simply let it fill the space. "You are welcome here if you are kind," he said. "You will be escorted out if you are anything else." Naxira's mouth curved. "You will not instruct me," she answered. "I have reshaped trade policy in 3 secto." "And yet," Marin said, "you have failed at the simplest negotiation of all, listening to your child." Darren arrived at a run, not because he was afraid, but because time matters when choices are made. Leora came with him, and Keo, sensing tides, stood between adults as if born for balance. Naxira turned to Darren, authority softening into something that tried to mimic love. "Come home," she said. "I forgive your adventure." Darren shook his head. "Mother," he said, and the word was both a thread and a blade. "Home is where they are." He placed a small tablet on the desk and slid it toward her. "This contains a record of your blocks, your orders, your edits. If you attempt to harm them again, the consortium will read every line." Naxira's mask cracked. For a flicker of a second, fear and pride fought in her eyes. She straightened. "And you would destroy me?" "I would set a story straight," Darren said softly. Silence held the room the way space holds stars, gently, but with no illusions. Then Keo tugged at Naxira's sleeve. "Are you my grandmother?" he asked. The question knocked on a door that hadn't been opened in years. Naxira swallowed. The lawyers looked at the floor as if it might save them. "Yes," she said at last, the words strange in her mouth. "Then, do you know stories?" Keo asked. "Because Mama says grandmothers know the old ones. Pride is hard, but stories are easier." Naxira's shoulders dropped a fraction. "I know many," she said, and her voice for the first time was not a weapon. Reconciliation did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived with tea and pauses and boundaries. Naxira took a modest suite in the upper ring, close enough to visit and far enough to learn patience. She came to Leora's lab and asked honest questions. She watched Darren read to Keo without correcting a single word. She learned to arrive with her hands empty and leave with her pockets lighter. Marin watched all of this from the edges and from the center, because that is what builders do. They stand where beams meet and see if the angles hold. He thought of the two names he whispered into the quiet before sleep, and the foundation he had been drafting with careful ink. One that would turn the cargo wards into neighborhoods that did not need charity, only opportunity. The announcement came on a morning that pretended to be ordinary. Marin stood in the atrium. The echo warm around him and told the station about the Solara Trust, named in a way that sounded like sunlight without saying why. The plan was plain and bold. Convert dead pods into living rooms, carve classrooms from forgotten storage, plant play gardens where forklifts had brooded, and fit every door with a good seal and a welcome sign. Leora would lead the engineering, Darren would run logistics, Joran would guard the edges. Naxira, after a long night with herself, pledged credits and contacts with a new, unfamiliar humility. The day the first children bounced on the soft turf of the new play court, Marin stood back and let noise bloom. Kyo taught two smaller kids how to hold the toy ship so it glowed brighter. Naxira told an old Azurian tale about stars that learned to share. Leora corrected Event's song with a turn of her wrist. Darren pretended not to cry and failed. Marin breathed and found that breathing had forgotten to hurt. Peace is not a finish line. It is a road you walk together, fixing it as you go. They were still walking when the next need arrived. The transport drifted in from a quadrant nobody wanted to name. Paint scorched, engines tired. When the dock arms caught it, the station felt the weight of too many hungry hours. The hatch opened and a line of travelers stepped into the bright air, blinking like new creatures. Their bags were stitched from old things. Their eyes were brave because the alternative was not. Marin saw them from the observation rail. He could have sent a team. Instead, he went himself, and he wasn't alone. Leora came with a small case of inhalers, and the calm she wore like a tool belt. Darren brought forms, because paperwork is just another kind of bridge when used gently. Kyo trotted ahead with a basket of welcome packs, grinning like he had invented kindness. Even Naxira walked with them, slower than pride would prefer, faster than fear could stop. The dock smelled like metal and beginning. Marin opened all four hands in the quatridian gesture of greeting that had once been too painful to use. "You look like you need a meal and a door that locks," he said. Simple words, safe words. One of the travelers, a grandmother with stripes of silver in her hair and a child at her side, nodded once. "We could use a place where the night is quiet," she said. "We have that." Leora answered. "And a window," the child piped up, "so I can see ships." "We have those too," Kyo said, bouncing. "And a playground where you can pretend to be a ship." They moved together through the station's corridors, past the spot where Leora had once hesitated before a fancy door, past the hall where Naxira had once raised her chin like a shield, past the lift where Marin had once learned how to stand still without turning to stone. The new homes smelled faintly of paint and strongly of new chance. A teacher, hired last week because dreaming means hiring, waited with a loose stack of tablet lessons and a looser smile. That evening, they gathered under a canopy in the garden ring. String lights made tiny constellations, and a soft breeze slipped through leaves that had learned the station's slow seasons. The travelers ate, cautiously at first, then the way people do who remember what it's like to be full. Someone sang in a language the translation halos didn't try to fix, and the sound made the plants around them listen. Kyo tugged at Marin's sleeve. "Can I show them the moving shelter idea?" he asked, eyes bright with a new kind of urgency. Marin nodded. Kyo set a model on the table, a little caravan of pods that clicked into a ring and unfolded into rooms. "It can fly where storms knock houses down," he explained in the serious voice of a young inventor. "And it brings its own clean air, and lights that are warm, not hot, and a small kitchen that knows how to make soup that tastes like home." A former counselor from the transport leaned in. "You made this?" Kyo shook his head. "I made it with everyone," he said. "Mama made the air good. Papa made the boxes go where they should. Uncle Marin told me to make the doors wide enough for joy, and my grandmother said to add a shelf for stories." Laughter reached every corner of the garden. Naxira, who might once have corrected the titles, simply wiped her eyes. "A shelf for stories is the only sensible shelf," she said, and nobody disagreed. Days became steady. The Solara Trust turned empty into enough. Children learned the station's safe paths by heart. Leora's team tuned the recyclers until the air felt like contentment. Darren's ledgers looked like poetry in columns. Joran found fewer emergencies and more reasons to smile. Naxira arrived with less jewelry and more questions. She left, often, with drawings from children who wanted her to come back with another tale. Years folded into one another like good fabric. Kyo grew tall without losing the tilt of wonder. He graduated from apprenticeships into solving problems that had bullied people for decades. On a morning full of blue sky, he presented his full-scale mobile habitat to the company board. He spoke simply, "This will go where grief is busy and make it work less." When they voted yes, before he finished, he looked not at the numbers, but at Marin, who sat at the end of the long table, smiling, like he had found a star he thought he had dropped. Afterward, on the observation deck, Kyo stood with Marin and the slow stars. "I've been asked to study on Earth," he said. "Mama can teach there. Papa can move cargo anywhere. Grandmother says Earth is charmingly old-fashioned and wants to teach proofs to anyone who will listen." He took a breath. "We want you to come, not as a guest, as us." Marin felt the old ache rise, and with it a new ease. "I used to think my work was metal and glass," he said. "It was always people. I will come if we keep a key here, because this place taught us how to begin again." "We'll keep 2 keys," Kyo said. "One for leaving, one for returning." Later that week, a small ship docked with a family on board. Their faces wore the thin courage of recent survivors. Ban Marin, Leora, Darren, Kyo, and Naxira walked to meet them with the practice that comes from meaning it. Marin spoke first, voice warm with a kindness that had learned to carry weight. "You look like you could use a meal and a safe place to rest," he said. "We can help." And the circle widened, quietly, steadily, the way rings spread on water after a stone is thrown with care. A plea answered at a restaurant door had become 1,000 welcomes. The station went on humming. A city of breath and shared light. The new family stepped forward, and the oldest architecture in the universe, one heart opening to another, held. In the end, nothing dramatic exploded. Instead, something repaired. A world that learns to feed its children, listen to its elders, and forgive enough to build again. That is how the story closes here, not with a shout, but with doors that stay open and tables that always have one more seat.